Hare Om Namaha. Om Harir Vidasyan Mama Sarvarakshang Nyastangri Padmaha Padagendra Prishte Durari Chamasi Gadesh Chapa Pashanthano Ashtagano Ashtabahu Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Common sense is defined in every standard dictionary as ordinary good judgment. The distinction between family life and spiritual life can be understood by common sense, especially when there's some experience to back it up. Any person who has undergone the tribulations of living within a family, either a nuclear family or an extended family, will give those tribulations up once he or she has finally decided to take shelter of a genuine guru. Now, as far as the administrative class is concerned, it is judged whether to be good or bad according to whether or not it actually follows the directions of the intelligent class of men. They are known as Brahmins. Common sense is the bane of a peculiar class of men known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. It is run by a band of lazy, incompetent, and fallen administrators, and their pucka promises all turn out to be post-dated blank checks. Real Brahmins and real Brahmin Vaishnavas give advice and give direction to administrators and managers, and they do so in terms of the knowledge of the revealed scriptures and the orders of the actual Acharya. Disobedience of the real guru on the part of the fallen administrators can actually usually be determined by common sense. And once you discover that deviation, it is incumbent upon you to give up the connection and place your faith elsewhere. Yet common sense is not the be-all and end-all. Common sense fails to understand the energy of the Lord, the external energy of the Lord, when it manifests and appears to be full of knowledge and appears to be full of happiness. Actually, it is only partially so, and that temporarily. The captivated conditioned souls are under the thraldom of the Maya, and thus they consider that the material nature is the all-in-all, and they neglect the primeval cause, which is given to us in the revealed scriptures and by the genuine Brahmins as well as the actual Acharya. Now, for those fortunates who can see through the trap of material nature, common sense has value. Actually, it's a question of appearances versus reality. The external energy is by nature inferior, whereas the internal potency is superior. The ISKCON confabulation represents the inferior energy. And the living entity, the Jivatma, in his or her pure state, is part of the internal potency, the superior energy. Once spiritual life is undertaken in earnest, any such practitioner should easily be able to overcome the sclerotic institutional dogma, and he or she can do so particularly with the aid of common sense. In the beginning, common sense is important in order to avoid and overcome the ISKCON confabulation and seek spiritual life and spiritual perfection elsewhere. Men with a poor fund of knowledge in that cult claim to be equal to the guru, or in the case of the rascal ISKCON GBC, they claim to be the ultimate spiritual authority representing both God and guru. That is never to be. It is not possible for a band of bluffers to become equal to or to surpass the perfected devotee. In the diseased condition, foolish followers, often devoid of common sense, accept the claims of institutional gurus and commissioners. Thus, they are misled by the inferior potency. If they employ just a small portion of common sense, that is, if they have any common sense left after such bad association and bad service, they would readily be able to see through all the flimsy ISKCON dogma. They cannot do it, however, because they have forgotten their real engagement. Neglecting common sense and addicted to the alleged supremacy of the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation and its peculiar version of extended family life. They reject the supremacy of the real guru. Counter to this, they are advised to reject the supremacy of the governing body because it has no spiritual authority whatsoever. Without coming to that realization, there cannot be any tranquility or perfection for any of them because they cannot get past the ISKCON wall. A wall is made up of either bricks or stones combined with mortar. And the bricks and stones of the ISKCON wall are the pucka profile of its prominent personalities, the imposed hierarchy, the well-decorated deities who unfortunately, due to the whole cult being bogus, are now little more than show bottle deities. The self-serving austerities of their kept Brahmins, the extravagant and colorful rituals, the temples, and the tasty food. And the mortar of that wall is its dogma. So let us look at the definition of dogma according to the dictionary, as well as the experience of your host. Dogma, noun. An unprovable doctrine or set of such doctrines put forth as authoritative by ecclesiastical power. A belief or set of beliefs that must be accepted by the members of an institution without question or doubt. Dogma needs to be differentiated from tattva and siddhanta. The fact is that ISKCON, even though it is severely deviated, is not so deviated when it comes to tattva and siddhanta. Ritvik, for example, is heavily deviated, and And as far as Neo-Mud is concerned, its wrong propaganda of the origination of the living entity is an Upasiddhanta. But then we come to dogma. And the ISKCON confabulation is loaded with dogma. And dogma can be shattered by using common sense. So let us take a look at a couple of quotes by Prabhupada, excerpts from room conversations and platform lectures and letters concerning common sense. This is an excerpt from a letter dated January 31st, 1972, to a devotee who eventually became the temple president of a Florida temple. So if you study my books carefully, then I am sure you will find out the means for applying this Krishna consciousness philosophy in all spheres of life. There is no limitation. It simply requires a little common sense practicality. The details simply require a little common sense. Sounds like he doesn't reject common sense. Sounds like in order to be practical, utility is the principle in Krishna consciousness, common sense is integral. Now, His Divine Grace had an extremely successful platform lecture at Ohio State in 1969. Actually, from one perspective, you could say that his movement took off at that time. So then he had some room conversations after that very successful lecture in a very large auditorium, which was quite ecstatic, in which he also showed his prowess. He's here talking to Allen Ginsberg, who you cannot say was really one of his followers, but Ginsberg did help him make inroads in New York City and also here in Columbus, Ohio. So Prabhupada says to Ginsberg, "The body is change. I am there, therefore I change this body. I will remain. This is common sense business." So as we already discussed, the definition of common sense is ordinary good judgment. It is a feature. It is a feature of intelligence. And we're not talking here transcendental intelligence. We're talking common sense intelligence. It is important to understand it. But common sense intelligence must be utilized in a way that is progressive so that pragya, actual spiritual intelligence, can manifest. And common sense can get us past all of these institutional dogmas which hold people in check, hold devotees in check. We need to overcome it. We need to overcome that wall, and we can do so with the aid of common sense. But now, let us take a look at six examples of ISKCON dogma. Remember, when these dogmas were instituted, you had to accept them. Otherwise, your life, if you stayed in the cult, was either very difficult or impossible. Let us take a look at some of these. First one, Acharyas of the Zone. Now, you may protest and you may say, Acharyas of the Zone, but that's been rejected. True, it's been rejected by everybody. These are the zonal acharyas, the 11 pretender Mahabhagavats, who all established themselves in their own zones demarcated geographically throughout the world in the spring of 1978. Yes, it's been rejected, but while it was in effect, it was heavy-duty dogma. You had to accept that in these zones there were these gurus, and they were taking Uttama Adhikari worship, which they had no right to take whatsoever. They went way too far, and as it turned out, they couldn't pull it off. But while it was still in effect, which it lasted for just short of a decade. The zonal acharya scam was very potent, and there were dogmas connected to it. For example, one of the dogmas was, well, if you came to Prabhupada's movement in a certain zone, then that means that Krishna says you should surrender to that guru who's the zonal acharya. Krishna is telling you this is the guru for you. Now, they couldn't do that in an airtight way, so if somebody was attached already, and before the zonal acharya scam, if they had come in contact with a sannyasi who happened to be one of these 11, so they would allow. But the point of the matter is that these two dogmas were going hand in hand. And I know from a practical example of one of the unfortunates who came to Prabhupada's movement literally just days after he departed. He didn't like that guru when he first saw that guru's big colorful picture on top of the Vyasasana in that temple. But he bought into the dogma, and thus he became quote-unquote initiated. It's a long story, but that's just one grain of rice. Undoubtedly that was repeated all throughout the world. Now again, let's go back to the counter-argument. Well, acharyas of the zone, it's been rejected. It was implemented because we received bad advice. Yes, that's true. The acharya of the zone idea came from Swami Sridhar in Navadvip. However, consider this with common sense. If it was such strongly established dogma, instituted very heavily and implemented completely throughout the whole world for just short of a decade, then its rejection should tell you something. They had to reject it because it was so grossly wrong. So that should inform, common sense should tell you that maybe there's some more of those dogmas that are being pushed right now that have no legitimacy. And that will be rejected in the future and simply be replaced by another dogma. As they keep stringing it on, dragging it out, and meanwhile implementing all these wrong ideas and initiating new people into their movement and continuing to grow on a horizontal basis, not on a vertical basis, to the point that it cannot be reversed. And we've already reached that point. We reached it far long ago. So acharyas of the zone was an example of a rejected dogma. However, then there is the dogma of GBC has an automatic corrective mechanism in it. Now, and one thing you need to understand about institutional dogmas. They're not stated outright very often because that dilutes their potency. For example, one of the members of the Vaishnava Foundation came into contact with one of the ISKCON gurus in India and started asking him questions, and he got in reply a dogma. But he didn't buy it, so he asked a heavier question showing that he didn't accept the first answer. But at that point, that so-called guru, he didn't answer anything after that. Why? He doesn't want that individual in their cult. In other words, they're not going to go to the nth degree of presenting their arguments and their dogmas and justifying their dogmas. They are not going to do that because it exposes them. It may be taped. It'll lead to opening the Pandora's box of further questions. Instead, for the gullible, for the psychologically vulnerable, for most of their followers now, for almost all their followers. They'll present the dogma, maybe justify it with one example of casuistry or bad logic, and then back off. They would prefer not to state these dogmas. Instead, they'd prefer that the dogmas marinate throughout the whole devotee community and simply get accepted in a form of a like-mindedness. That's not too difficult to understand. So this dogma of that the governing body commission has an automatic self-corrective mechanism, you can look through all of Prabhupada's letters, excerpts from morning walks, room conversations, platform lectures. He never stated such a thing. On one occasion he said, if everyone follows, the movement will make advancement automatically, and that letter was connected to the governing body commission. But that's not an automatic self-corrective mechanism. It's common sense to see that if a deviation gets institutionalized, that institutional delusion will continue to ripen, and that on a group level or on an individual level, it will not be corrected until the results are so egregiously terrible that they have to correct it, and then they'll slip something else in order to rationalize why it went on, which there's a dogma for that. We're going to be discussing that very soon. Now, the next dogma that we're going to discuss, unless there are any questions, the next dogma we're going to discuss is the no objection certificate. The no objection certificate. Yeah. Bhakt Ernest.
Yeah, I have a question. So, in his purport in second canto, Srila Prabhupada comments as follows. Common sense is always imperfect, whereas the description in the Shastras is always perfect and complete. So my question is, since common sense is herein said to be imperfect, and our process and goal are both perfect, how can we take any stock in common sense when making any judgment about what is fact and what is not fact?
It's a good question, and it's a question of apples and oranges. In other words, common sense should not be applied to the Shastra. We all know that example that Prabhupada gave so many times of that the conch shell is pure, although it is a bone, an ocean bone, whereas bones are impure. So you'd say common sense. Well, if bones are impure, and we have practical experience that they are, and stool also is impure, but the stool of a cow is pure, cow dung, which is used all the time throughout all of rural India in many different ways. So common sense says, nah, that can't be. But common sense has no jurisdiction as far as Shastra is concerned. Now, as far as seeing through dogma, common sense has plenty of jurisdiction. And common sense, logic also related to common sense, is helpful when it comes to facts on the mundane plane or facts that have some connection to Krishna consciousness on a lower plane. Not in terms of Shastra. Not in terms of a statement by the Guru which is self-evident. Then common sense needs to understand its place and its value, which is on a lower level. But nevertheless, it does have value, and it does have application, and it can help us. And as you've already heard from quotes I've given, and I shall be giving a couple more, common sense does have value and was appreciated by His divine grace. So let us now proceed to the next dogma, as I just mentioned, the no objection certificate. This is another institutional dogma determining how a guru is validated in the ISKCON confabulation. You need to see the underlying scale. The underlying scale of all of these concoctions of institutional guru And please note that since November 14th, 1977, all the so-called gurus in the ISKCON confabulation, without exception, have been institutional gurus. The 11 pretender Mahabhagavats were all institutional gurus. You can say, well, they acted like wild cards. Sure they did. But they required the approval, the rubber stamp, the validation of the governing body commission, which they achieved before they did what their antics turned out to be. And since that time, the stages of institutional guru in the ISKCON confabulation have gone through, first of all, the first allegation, completely false, that Prabhupada appointed those 11 men. As almost everybody knows now, they were simply appointed as Ritviks in July of 1977. Prabhupada never recognized anybody as guru, at least never officially or in a tangible way. There's no statement that's been recorded anywhere. There's no proof on paper in the form of documentation that His Divine Grace ever recognized any of His disciples as guru. As far as recognizing 11 Ritviks is concerned, Ritviks aren't gurus. We've discussed that previously. They're adjuncts to help the actual guru, the spiritual master, in terms of the technicalities involved in initiation, the procedures. Ritviks are involved in ceremonies all throughout Vedic literature. For example, in one ceremony, if memory serves, it's the Agnishtoma Karmakanda ceremony. 16 Ritviks are required for that. Now, Prabhupada would use either one or two. At any rate, that's a bit of a divergent topic. The point of the matter is that Prabhupada appointed 11 Ritviks. He never stated anywhere that Ritvik Acharya, then it becomes as good as Acharya, another dogma. He never said that they automatically become gurus, spiritual master, Diksha gurus, initiating spiritual masters after his departure. There's no record of it, nor is it established in Vedic or Vaishnava literature that such a thing is automatically the case. So, the stages, first the claim was made that Prabhupada appointed these 11 men as spiritual master. When that turned out to be false, which we've discussed in our previous discourses, then they slipped it to the next level, namely, no, okay, we're a little wrong on that. Actually, the GBC appointed 11 Diksha gurus, and Prabhupada gave GBC full material and spiritual authority. So it's just one step removed from Prabhupada. False again. But let us not delve into that at this point. Let us stay on topic here. The stages until we reach this no objection certificate, which is the current stage. First there was Prabhupada appointed the gurus, then GBC appointed or recognized the appointment. Then it became voting gurus in. That also was challenged. Then there was no 3 blackballs, a very temporary stage in which the idea was that anybody, any initiate of Prabhupada can become guru, but if 3 GBCs say no, then he can't. So it's like a veto. Eventually we reach this stage of no objection certificate, which means that no member of the governing body is really objecting forcefully to this spiritual master becoming a Diksha guru. All the disciples are Shiksha gurus anyway, another cheapening of the process. There are no Shiksha gurus in the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. If there are any, they're remaining very hidden. At any rate, the no objection certificate is accompanied by the cue that there's some committee and it makes a recommendation because somebody says, I want to become a Diksha guru. So then that person then is put into a queue where in 1 year, if he doesn't do anything that causes any kind of scandal or show any deviation or egregious fall down, but it may be a 1-year queue, a 2-year queue, a 3-year queue, and it's all related to the no objection certificate, in which the GBC backs off and says we have no objection, but of course If he turns out not to be a guru, we didn't say he was, but we have no objection. But they're still controlling it completely through putting him in a queue for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and also that he requires to receive the no objection certificate. Now, I personally am not certain whether or not these certificates are issued in a hard copy form. I tend to think they aren't, but whether they are or aren't doesn't matter. It's an immaterial consideration. All of these stages that have just been delineated are stages of institutional control of the Diksha Guru, which means that every single one of those gurus, starting with the 11 pretender Mahabhagavats, were all institutional gurus. An institutional guru means bogus guru. For example, Prabhupada said, when I say you become guru, then you become guru. Regular guru, that's all. We went over that in the last discourse in great detail. So, you need Prabhupada's sanction to become guru. But if he gives the order, when I order you become guru, he becomes guru. If you receive the order, you should immediately be able to accept disciples if they pass the tests. What is this business that you have to wait in queue for 1 or 2 or 3 years? This is all institutional dogma. And the institutional dogma is centered now upon this concoction known as the no objection certificate, which all the members of that cult are buying into, just like they bought into the Mahabhagavat Zonalacharya Uttamadhikari worship scam, all the way down. One stage of another of institutional dogma, and everybody stays loyal to the governing body commissioner and its dogma, even when the dogma is completely uprooted, replaced by another dogma. Common sense shatters this. If you have enough common sense, then you can see through these scams. So unless there's another question, let us proceed to the next dogma.
Yes, Bhakta Vijaya has a question.
Bhakti Vijaya.
Srila Prabhupada seems to indicate in a room conversation from 1973 that common sense is destroyed when there is bias. I shall read this exchange, and after I do so, I'm interested in whether or not you agree with this indication. Prabhupada,
Yeah.
so he must be reasonable, that's all. David Lawrence, yes, that's it. Prabhupada, so we expect every human being rational. Eastern, Western, there is no difference. You have to come to the platform of general common sense. David Lawrence, yes. Prabhupada, if you become biased, then it will be impossible. Room conversation, July 12, 1973, London.
Is there a question about it?
Yes. I'm interested in whether or not you agree with this indication that Srila Prabhupada seems to indicate that common sense is destroyed when there is bias.
Yes, actually, that excerpt from that room conversation, a well-known room conversation with David Lawrence in which they discuss many important topics, it really makes it very clear, logically, that when there's bias, there's no common sense. That bias kills common sense. It destroys it. And there's no heavier bias than institutional dogma. Take any man individually, with some exceptions, you'll find that every man individually is reasonable. But put him in a group and let him buy into the dogma of the group, he immediately becomes a blockhead. Because dogma means institutional prejudice. Dogma, institutional dogma, ecclesiastical dogma means bias. And when that bias is there, you got the covered glass. You got the colored glass. They're not seeing things clearly. They're seeing it according to the color of the institution. They're buying into the dogma, so much so that statements in the Shastra, they're put secondary, tertiary, or almost meaningless. The dogma goes to the top of the totem pole. And those who are expert in using the dogma work their way up to the top of the turtle tank, and with that dogma, when they're on the top of the turtle tank, push the lower turtles down. So, the indication in this room conversation that bias needs to be overcome by common sense is very direct, very logical, and I fully accept it. So let us next go to a dogma, which has already been mentioned briefly. This dogma has not been rejected. It also came from Swami B.R. Sridhar in Navadvip, but unlike the other one which we discussed earlier, this one is still accepted. And the statement by Swami B.R. Sridhar was, Ritvikacharya, then it becomes as good as Acharya. Now there's some controversy connected to this, so I'm going to straightforward talk about that controversy. There's no proof of the statement, at least not anywhere in written form or on any of the websites. So many dispute that Swami B.R. Sridhar actually made this statement. It's well known that a contingent of upper echelon leaders from that cult went to Swami B.R. Sridhar and went to find out how they should implement the new program after Prabhupada has disappeared. So he asked them, what's the basis of your gurus? And they told him that, well, Prabhupada appointed them as Ritviks. And then he said, Ritvikacharya, then it becomes as good as Acharya. When the word then is used, preposition then, it means then when he disappears. Ritvikacharya, then it becomes as good as Acharya. So there are those who say he didn't say it. But the fact of the matter is that I remember reading it. So you're receiving it on the basis of my authority, because I read it. I had access to these kinds of documents all throughout the early 80s. And I read them and I kept them, but I've moved throughout the world and throughout the United States a bare minimum of 25 times since that time. And some got stolen, some got destroyed by the elements, some got misplaced. Maybe somebody borrowed something, 5-finger discount, whatever. I can't prove it in a hard copy, but I remember reading it in a hard copy. And it makes total sense. It's not nonsensical that he would say something like that, because he did say that you're Ritviks there, they're gurus. But he said it in a particular way. At any rate, you can accept or reject. But the fact of the matter is that it's part of ISKCON dogma. That's for sure and certain. That the Ritviks that were appointed, the 11 Ritviks in July of 1977 when Prabhupada left, it just so happened that 11 of them, those 11 individuals, were the ones who became the Mahabhagavats with the zones. And the dogma is there in the ISKCON confabulation. They believe that it's logical that Prabhupada made this somewhat indirect arrangement for who he wanted to have as his gurus, as Diksha gurus after his departure. Ritvikacharya, then it becomes as good as Acharya. Acharya in this case meaning Diksha guru, that Acharya who can give the initiation. All right, so let's say you accept it. Is there any other reason to reject it? If you're accepting that it's, well, it seems logical. Yeah, there's a very big reason to reject it. What is that reason? The whole scam failed. It cratered. Okay, those Ritviks, then you say they became Diksha gurus. Oh, and what did they do as Diksha gurus, so-called? Created these zones, created this opulent worship on these huge, elaborate Vyasasans, same height as Prabhupada's, took all this worship from their god brothers and god sisters, put the god sisters sometimes up front. Yeah. And the whole thing cratered. Some of them, the whole time, were engaged in illicit sexual connections, either sexual or homosexual. Some were engaged, at least one, in psychotropic drugs such as LSD. You had all these deviations which came forth to the point that the whole movement almost cratered in the mid-80s. It couldn't stand anymore because they were so far from what is the standard of just a genuine or regular guru on the Madhyam platform, the monitor guru. What to speak of an Uttama who's relishing the bhava of devotional love. So, if you need some proof that those 11 Ritviks weren't actually Diksha Gurus, then Palena Parachiyate, judge by the results. The results were horrendous for all 11 of them. You may argue that some of them appeared to still be pretty good. We could go through all 11 of them very specifically. They all were deviant in so many ways. Not all of them were audaciously deviant as far as sexuality was concerned or drugs was concerned, but they were all very audacious, very puffed up, and very severe to the critics, on and on. And they all bought into ISKCON dogma and pushed it. So, this idea that the Ritviks, it's still held by the ISKCON confabulation, that the Ritviks were approved indirectly in this way to be the Diksha Gurus. It is dogma. And with your common sense, you should be able to see through it.
Gokulananda has a question.
Gokulananda.
From your perspective, can you tell us the one or two ISKCON dogmas that are the most deceptive?
What's the most deceptive ISKCON dogma? First of all, some of these dogmas come in the form of an emotive question. You have to understand this. For example, one such emotive question is, well, you say that the 11 were bogus, but there were so many new people. Who will initiate them? See? In the form of this emotive question. It's a dogma, actually, but it's an indirect dogma. But it still is a dogma. There's a dogma underlying it, namely is that the guru couldn't possibly leave and not leave Diksha Gurus behind when he does depart, but actually he can. And that's why lines disband. That's why lines disintegrate and are lost, because of deviation. At any rate, that's just one example of an emotive dogma in which it's in the form of a question. So in regard to this particular question from Gokulananda, what's the most deceptive dogma in the fabricated so-called ISKCON? It's this. How could Prabhupada have been a completely empowered guru if he did not at least empower some Madhyamadikaris? This is a killer dogma for those who can't shatter it with common sense. It's apples and oranges. You have His Divine Grace through the Prabhupada, Uttamadikari, completely self-realized, completely God-realized, on the highest level possible of spiritual master. And then you have disciples coming from all kinds of riff-raff considerations and situations. His preaching mission in the West basically lasted just a few days past a decade. It is not that he will automatically create Madhyamadikaris. It's not an automatic process. Free will is what it is. You see, the basis of this dogma, and again, remember, it's in the form of an emotive question, but there's dogma underlying it. There's always been regular gurus. there's always been Madhyamadikaris in the movement. That's the dogma underlying it. Now, while Prabhupada was physically manifest, is it possible that there were Madhyamadikaris in his movements? Sure. It's possible. You may even say it's probable, but it doesn't matter. When the colossal hoax came down in late March of 1978, who stood up and protested? A Madhyamadikari could never go along with that. If you say, well, the Madhyamadikari might have remained quiet, that's fine, but then how can he initiate disciples into the line? He'll not be approved unless he approves of the scam. So it's an irrelevant point. The fact is, everybody who cooperated with that 11 pretender Mahabhagavat Zonlacharya scam, even if they were Madhyam, they fell down immediately by cooperating. And also, a genuine guru has to have some mercy, has to have some grace, has to have some feeling for all these new disciples coming in to get spiritually and psychologically slaughtered by 11 pretender Mahabhagavats. And he's letting it go on because he wants to remain silent. And let us just say that there were some Madhyamadikaris, and they were what? They were engaged in temple activities, probably with some authority. Would not they be approached by newcomers? Would not there be some questions asked? Especially if they're sannyasis? How did they answer those questions? The point of the matter is that the dogma underlying this, namely, is that institutional gurus are automatically bogus, automatically bona fide gurus. That's the dogma underlying it. That there were regular gurus in Prabhupada's movement. Once we got past the problem of this 11 Mahabhagavat scam, then these regular gurus came out and things got back to normal because there were so many Madhyamadikaris already. Prabhupada had to have created Madhyamadikaris, such a completely advanced guru on the highest platform possible, certainly made some intermediate second level devotees. No, it's not like that. The process is not automatic like that. Free will is always present. So, regarding this question from Gokulananda, namely, what is the most pernicious and most deceptive dogma? It's this. Namely, the dogma is that there were always regular gurus in Prabhupada's movement. Even if there were some devotees qualified to be Diksha gurus in Prabhupada's movement while he was physically manifest, that all went to hell when the colossal hoax came down. So let us proceed to look at some more dogma. This is a big one. The governing body is the ultimate authority in all matters, material and spiritual. This is a huge dogma, and this one, the leaders of the ISKCON confabulation tenaciously cling to. This is the dogma that cannot be shattered, but it should be shattered. By common sense, let us remember that the governing body commission put its stamp of approval on those 11 pretender Mahabhagavats, all of whom themselves were commissioners. Now, numbers-wise, they didn't have complete control of the vote or the GBC at that time, but they're very close. In that meeting, from what I understand, there were 23 governing body commissioners present. Some say 24. But so 11, let's say 23 were there. So 11 is not quite half of 23, but in regard to power, oh, there's no question. Those 11 had at least 80% of the power of the governing body, although they didn't have the votes. They didn't have quite half of the votes. But they were able to push it through. So, governing body, ultimate authority, would buy into that when Prabhupada said regular guru, that's all. It was the duty, it was the responsibility, the fiduciary duty of the governing body commission to know these things. They took advantage of so many perquisites and so much power and so much adulation and so many distinctions and positions. Such a easy life they had. Well, you need to at least pay for that in the form of fulfilling your duty. But they didn't do it. Their duty was to protect Prabhupada's movement, protect the Siddhanta, protect the Tattva, and protect all of Prabhupada's initiated disciples. Instead, they were foxes in the henhouse. Is that an example? And there's many more. For example, are they protecting Prabhupada's books right now? The BBT is running ramshod over the books, roughshod over the books. Uncontrolled changes. Change, change, change. Every day another change. And the vast majority of these changes have nothing to do with being corrections. They're changes. Sometimes they're interpolations. Sometimes they're things that are inserted in for very obvious self-serving purposes. We shall discuss this in future discourses. But the point of the matter is the governing body is doing nothing about it. Instead, they're allowing these books to be produced and these websites to have links to these new changes, and the folio, even as early as the 2003 folio, which otherwise is quite good, having all these changed editions of the books. And here you have the governing body allowing it to go on. Why? Oh, if the statement is made, no, the BBT is a separate entity. Governing body is its own entity, and BBT is separate from ISKCON. Technically, as far as legalities are concerned, that's true. But do you think for a moment that the governing body doesn't have ultimate jurisdiction over the BBT? Do you think for a moment, if the governing body came down heavy and said, we're not going to use the books you're publishing with these changes, you think that the BBT would continue to make these changes, continue to publish these changes? It is indirectly being approved by the governing body, which means it has no spiritual authority whatsoever. But again, it's the dogma that the governing body is the ultimate authority. What's stated in the will, and we've gone over this many times, and we shall continue to go over it, because you can't hear it enough until you understand it, that in the will it says that the governing body is the ultimate managing authority. Granted, and they manage the thing right to hell. But nevertheless, we must understand what the purpose was why Prabhupada put that there. He wasn't appointing a new guru in the form of a commission. He put it there to protect his properties, particularly his properties in India, from the reaches of the Gaudiya Math and from the reaches of his sons. In other words, he made it so that the authority was the governing body, and they would have never allowed the Gaudiya Math to take over the movement and take over the temples and the properties, and they would not allow Prabhupada's sons to take them over either. That was the chief purpose that he put that in there. He didn't put that in there in order to indirectly and covertly tell all of his initiated disciples, actually now, I, as the spiritual master, am replaced by the governing body as the new spiritual master. Nor could he assign to the governing body ultimate spiritual authority. That was not possible. They were not on a level where any such thing could be assigned to them. How do we know? Palena parchiyate, judged by the results. But this dogma is powerful. And if you go up to every member who's a hardcore, especially the fanatics on the third level, third echelon, you go up to them and you say to them, do you really believe that the governing body is the ultimate authority, both material and spiritual? Oh yes. You have to buy into that. That's the dogma. Now it's not too deceptive. We had a previous question about the most deceptive dogma. It's not very deceptive. The dogma is straightforward. This one they will preach. This one they won't hide. But you, if you still have common sense, if you've gotten past the institutional bias and the personalities that put prejudice into your minds, if you've gotten past that through common sense, you should shatter this dogma. And if enough devotees use their common sense to shatter it, that whole scam would crater within a few years. Especially, we need the abolition of the governing body commission, because this greatly deviant commission has produced so much havoc for devotees throughout the world, both initiated and uninitiated. So unless there's... All right?
Yeah, there is a question from Mahasankarshan.
Mahasankarshan. Your question.
You have told us that Prabhupada once said that the dull-witted must be cheated. Does this statement have any relationship to a devotee needing to possess some common sense?
Dull-witted must be cheated. And there was a kind of battle for authority on the Hawaiian Islands in the mid-70s. A very charismatic sannyasi who Prabhupada gave sannyas, but he already was acting like a guru and had disciples even before he came to Prabhupada. He was accepted by many of the devotees throughout the Hawaiian Islands and in other areas of the Pacific, such as the Philippines. He was accepted as being a pure devotee. As a matter of fact, he took the title Prabhupada right after Prabhupada departed. At any rate, there was a faction of devotees that had this sentiment, and then there was the temple president, who was not nearly as charismatic as this sannyasi, and who, it was revealed, was engaged in homosexual activity, although devotees didn't understand that at the time because that was, of course, kept hidden. There also, after he was replaced, there was an Indian-bodied devotee, former Hindu, placed as the temple president there, and it was revealed that he had his fingers in the till. So he also had to leave with his wife. They fled with the money. At any rate, the Hawaii scene was somewhat complicated, and it was well known throughout the movement that things were very loose there. As Prabhupada said, that Hawaii was the last place on earth that was really heavenly. And I've been there. I was there for 2 years. It is very heavenly. I was there during some of this, and I have practical experience. Now, I was not present when Prabhupada said dull-witted must be cheated. But the devotee who asked the question which led to that answer by Prabhupada has told me in the past, many, many years ago, decades ago, and she was a follower of that charismatic sannyasi for at least many years she was. She asked a question of Prabhupada, and she told me directly what her question was and what his answer was. So her question was, at the end apparently of a lecture, I don't think this was in a room conversation, when Prabhupada would give lectures in the temple there, it was a very small temple in Honolulu, devotees were crowded in, but he'd sometimes, not always, but he'd sometimes have a question and answer session after he gave his lecture. So I'm presuming that's what it was, but there's a slight possibility it was a room conversation, although generally not too many females were in those room conversations. So I'm thinking it was an open temple, open lecture question and answer. So she asked Prabhupada, okay, I'm not going to give the names of these personalities, but I'm sure she used the names. But she asked, so there's this charismatic sannyasi, and he appears to be the spiritual authority and devotional authority here. And then there's the temple president, and he appears to be the spiritual authority and devotional authority. So I'm just an unintelligent woman. I can't determine who the actual authority is. Can you tell us who the actual spiritual authority is? And Prabhupada answered, dull-witted must be cheated. I am pleased, Krishna is pleased, why are you displeased? Basically, he would not say either one of them. Instead, What he was saying is, if you're dull-witted, you're going to go bogus anyway. Prabhupada's movement was not for the dull-witted, and it still isn't. It's for the intelligent class. He wanted to create Brahmins. And Brahmins are the intelligent class. And you can't be dull-witted if you're a Brahmin. You can't be a stupid sadhu. So, he answered in that way. And as far as this question is concerned, since the basic level of intelligence is common sense, namely, according to the definition, ordinary good judgment, which should be able to discern who's got the approval. He's basically saying, use your intelligence and you will understand who represents me. And that's incumbent upon all new devotees, whether they've contacted Prabhupada or never have directly while he was physically manifest contacted him. So now we shall proceed to the final dogma. This one is a cover dogma. In other words, the deviations that came down, and they were all related to and under the auspices of the governing body in the late 70s and early 80s and mid 80s, and the ISKCON confabulation almost cratered in the mid 80s. It came very close. At any rate, the governing body commission was implicated in so many deviations is more than a bit obvious. So you need a dogma to cover that. And the dogma, pushed particularly by the blue blood professor, is it didn't work, so we abandon it. Basically, to explain this dogma, it means what he's saying is, all right, we thought that you needed to have completely realized devotees on the highest level in order for them to be genuine gurus and to carry on the movement. So we tried something, and we tried 11 men accepting worship as Mahabhagavats and to have zones. It didn't work, so we abandoned it. So we learned from it. It was all good motives. They all had good motives. The governing body had good motives. It was an experiment. We thought this is what Prabhupada wanted. Then we came to the conclusion what he really wanted was the collegial arrangement. Remember, there was Prabhupada's movement when it was bona fide. Then there was the first transformation, which was the 11 pretender Mahabhagavats. Then you had the second transformation in the mid-80s, which was the collegial, when they had to come off their Vyasasans. They got to keep their disciples. What a compromise that was, and still is. But they come off their Vyasasans. Now they can't have these high Vyasasans. They can't be worshipped anymore like that. Although an exception was made in West Bengal. Just see. At any rate, in order to cover the egregious and devastating, the colossal hoax deviation of the late 70s, in which the fingerprints of the governing body commission are all over that. In order to cover it, then they say, yeah, all right, okay, we tried that, didn't work, we come up with something better. This is dogma. You can't change the process like that midstream and say, oh, that was a major deviation. We're still bona fide the whole time. That, by the way, is another dogma. That the GBC, no matter how it deviates, it's still bona fide the whole time. It's another dogma. It relates to that ultimate managing authority dogma. So we have gone over a number of these dogmas with you today in this discourse. Now, soon, someday, you might have a bad day at Black Rock, and it might be compounded by you coming into contact with a fanatic from the institution. And You might elect to have some conversation with him, a bad decision, but you might elect to do so. And he starts spewing ISKCON dogma. At that point, you should reply to him to stop him dead in his tracks. Just reply to him in 3 words. Curb your dogma. Tattvamasi. After revolting against the Lord, the conditioned soul, even when he achieves this rare human opportunity, generally tends to continue in the waking dream state. It's a bit risky to do so because one can sink from that state back down to animal life or even lower. The genuine devotee, the servant of the Lord, works to enlighten others to come out and give up the dream, give up the waking dream state, to start to see reality for what it is. But the governing body of the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation will always be alert to spew its dogma against any such preaching by a real devotee. An oligarchical body can never be bona fide. The devotee urges everyone to escape semi-consciousness by becoming a devoted, theistic transcendentalist and very interested in tattva, siddhanta, and proper use of common sense. However, material nature is very strong, and it's so constituted that members of vitiated cults learn the art of pulling the levers of their organized make-show, usually successfully, in order to keep psychological vulnerabilities active amongst their followers. Eagerness to hear the transcendental science is the first step in awakening, but the unfortunates remain complacent in and enamored by an institutional dreamscape that kills whatever common sense they should otherwise have. Because of this ignorance, and because they are not able to see their actual situation, they remain controlled by the dream weavers, and they cannot come to spiritual knowledge. However, if through your determination of intelligence you are able to imbibe this harsh message that has been received today, then welcome to reality. Theological science is a difficult subject, and it cannot be understood by persons who are too attached to deviant cults. In terms of time and circumstance, real devotees work to enlighten others how they can escape institutional dogma. And the devotees who are never bewitched by the bamboozlement of that dogma should be able to more effectively and most effectively help others advance in spiritual life. Because devotional service and real preaching is dynamic activity, and devotees are meant to become competent in being able to inject it into the brains of others, and therefore help to free the misguided who wrongly put their faith in deviated institutions. Sadeva Samya